She looked at me with that quiet, knowing smile and said, "If you knock again, I won't say no." I laughed it off that night, but those words followed me home, echoing in the silence, daring me to take one more step closer to her. I still remember the first time she said it. It wasn't in a way that was dramatic or loud or even planned. It slipped from her lips like an afterthought, almost like she hadn't meant for me to hear it. I was walking down the narrow hallway of our apartment building, the kind of place where the walls carried every footstep and every door creak. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and someone's cooking 2 floors down. It was late, and the hallway lights flickered in that tired way they always did. That's when her door opened. She stepped out just as I passed by. She was older, at least by 2 decades, but carried herself with this calm grace that made her presence feel grounding. She wore a simple cardigan over a dress, her hair loosely tied back as if she hadn't cared too much about appearances that evening. And yet, she still looked stunning in a way that felt natural, unforced. We exchanged the usual polite smiles. She asked if I was coming home late from work again. I nodded, making some small joke about how my boss didn't believe in normal hours. She chuckled softly, her laughter low and warm, and for a moment I thought the conversation would end there. But then she tilted her head, eyes narrowing with a playful glint. "If you knock again," she said, her voice quiet but steady, "I won't say no." The words landed differently, not heavy, not careless, but charged with a kind of teasing weight. I froze, unsure whether she meant it as a joke or something else. My heart jumped in my chest, quick and uneven, as if I had stepped into a moment that wasn't meant for me. I laughed it off, trying to match her tone, but her gaze lingered longer than expected. For the first time, I noticed the way her eyes held a softness beneath their confidence, like she was revealing something she wasn't used to sharing. And then, just like that, she smiled, a small, secret smile, and slipped back into her apartment. The faint trace of her perfume lingered in the air, something floral with a deeper warmth beneath it. I stood there for a second longer, staring at the closed door, feeling the echo of her words burn into my memory. It wasn't a promise. It wasn't even an invitation. It was something in between, a line thrown into the quiet, daring me to decide what to do with it. As I unlocked my own door across the hall, I couldn't shake the thought. My hands were steady, but my chest felt tight, alive with something I couldn't name. Her voice played over and over in my mind, softer each time but no less insistent. "If you knock again, I won't say no." And though I told myself it was just playful banter, part of me knew, from that night on, nothing between us would feel quite the same again. The next day, her words still lingered with me. It's strange how a single sentence, so brief, so casually spoken, can stay in your chest long after the moment has passed. "If you knock again, I won't say no." It was almost like a song lyric that refused to fade. That evening, I found myself listening. Not intentionally, not in a way that felt invasive, but our walls were thin, and sound carried easily in this old building. Through the faint hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of pipes, I could hear her voice. She was laughing, speaking on the phone with someone, maybe a friend. The sound was warm, unguarded. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling, realizing how rare it was to hear her like this. Usually, she carried herself with composure, almost like armor. But here, even through a wall, she seemed lighter, freer, and that only made me more curious. A dozen times, I caught myself glancing at my door, at the strip of light spilling from the hallway outside. I imagined myself standing there again, raising my hand, knocking once more. But each time the thought came, I shook it away, felt reckless. I was younger, still trying to figure out my place in the world, and she seemed like she had already lived through storms I couldn't begin to understand. Later that night, I heard her door open. My heart kicked up instantly. I tried to act casual, fumbling with a book on my table, but the sound of her footsteps grew closer until I knew she was just outside. I opened my own door at the same time, pretending I was heading out for something trivial. And there she was. Her hair was undone this time, falling loosely around her shoulders. She wore a soft, oversized sweater and simple jeans, nothing like the polished neighbor I usually saw in heels and tailored coats. Yet, somehow, she looked even more striking like this, relaxed, unadorned, real. Our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then she gave me a look, calm, but with a spark of amusement flickering underneath, as if she could read every thought racing through my head. "Long day?" she asked lightly. "Yeah," I admitted, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yours?" She gave a small shrug, her smile tugging at the corner of her lips. "Just one of those evenings." We passed each other in the narrow hallway, and in that brief space, our shoulders brushed. It was the smallest touch, barely there, but my skin felt alive where her sweater had grazed my arm. I don't even think she meant it. The hallway was simply too tight, but the awareness it stirred in me was impossible to ignore. I caught her scent again, that same soft perfume, and I wondered if she noticed how quiet I had gone. She glanced back once before unlocking her door, and for a second, our eyes locked again. She didn't say anything this time. She didn't need to. Her silence was heavier than words, and it left me with the restless feeling that the story between us had only just begun. Over the next week, it was as if the universe had quietly decided to place us in each other's path. Not in big, dramatic ways, but in the smaller, everyday rhythms of life. At the mailbox, we reached for our envelopes at the same time. Our fingers brushed accidentally, and she gave me a knowing smile, pulling her hand back with that quiet grace she always carried. On the stairwell, I held the railing for her as she passed, and she murmured a soft thank you without looking up, her voice low, almost like it belonged to a private moment. The more it happened, the more I noticed details I hadn't before. The way she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear when she was thinking. The way her eyes softened when she laughed, lines forming at the corners in the most beautiful, lived-in way. She wasn't trying to draw attention. She didn't have to. Her presence seemed to steady everything around her. One evening, I found her struggling with 2 heavy grocery bags in the entryway. Before I even thought about it, I stepped forward. "Here, let me," I said, reaching for the bags. She hesitated for a moment, like she wasn't used to someone stepping in, but then she handed them over, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you. They always make these handles thinner and thinner, don't they?" I laughed, adjusting the weight in my arms. "Yeah, I think they're secretly testing our endurance." We walked together toward her apartment, the hallway unusually quiet except for the soft echo of our footsteps. She asked about my work, about the late nights she always seemed to catch me coming home from. Her questions weren't just polite. She listened with an attentiveness that made me feel as though every word mattered. I found myself opening up more than I usually did, admitting little things I rarely shared. How uncertain I was about my career path, how I sometimes felt caught between wanting stability and wanting freedom. She nodded slowly, as if she understood. "I remember being in that place," she said softly. "It feels like the whole world is waiting for you to decide, and you're not sure which way to lean." Her honesty disarmed me. There was no advice hidden inside her words, no judgment, just recognition. That was rare. When we reached her door, I passed her the bags. She steadied one with her hand, and in the process, her fingers brushed against my wrist. Just for a second. But it was enough. A simple touch, light and fleeting, yet it sent a warmth spiraling up my arm. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she did and chose not to say anything. She just smiled, that soft, reserved smile, and said, "You're kind. Thank you." I mumbled something back, but my thoughts were already racing, because in that moment I realized these small encounters weren't small at all. They were building something piece by piece, like bricks being quietly stacked into a wall or maybe a bridge. And every time we crossed paths, I felt that bridge drawing us closer. It happened on a night when the silence felt heavier than usual. I had been pacing my apartment, restless, pretending to read a book but never turning the page. Every sound in the hallway, every footstep, every distant door closing, seemed sharper, more alive. And then, without realizing I had made the choice, I found myself standing outside her door. My hand hovered over the wood. For a moment, I thought about walking away, telling myself this was foolish, that I was imagining things. But then I remembered her words, "If you knock again, I won't say no." So I knocked, lightly, once. The sound echoed louder than I expected, thudding straight through my chest. For a second, I panicked. But before I could retreat, the door opened. She stood there, framed by the glow of lamplight behind her. Her hair was loosely tied back, a few strands falling freely, and she wore a soft blouse with sleeves rolled to her elbows. She looked surprised at first, then amused, her lips curving into a knowing smile. "Well," she said gently, leaning against the doorframe, "I was wondering if you'd actually take me up on it." I tried to find words, but all I managed was a nervous laugh. She tilted her head, studying me in that quiet, unhurried way of hers, then stepped aside. "Come in," she said. "Just a cup of tea." Her apartment was warm, inviting, nothing like the minimal, sterile space I imagined. Books lined the shelves, candles half burned on the coffee table, and soft lamplight spilled across the room. It smelled faintly of jasmine tea and something sweeter, like vanilla. The air itself felt gentler in here, as if it belonged to her. I sat on the edge of her couch while she moved to the kitchen corner, filling a kettle. She didn't rush, didn't fuss. Every motion was calm, graceful, like she was at home in herself. And for the first time, I wasn't just noticing her as my neighbor. I was seeing the world she had built around her, a space filled with warmth and care. When she returned with 2 cups, she handed one to me. Our fingers brushed on the handle, a touch so brief it could have been nothing. But I felt it, the warmth of her skin, the softness of her hand, and it lingered. We talked at first about nothing. The weather, the quirks of the building, a movie she had watched. But then the silences between us started to stretch. Not uncomfortable, but charged, like the air just before a storm. Every glance lasted a little longer than it needed to. Every smile carried an unspoken question. At one point, she leaned back in her chair, eyes fixed on me. "You look nervous," she said, her voice low, teasing but not unkind. "Maybe I am," I admitted. Her smile softened. She didn't answer, didn't press. She just held my gaze a little longer, letting the quiet settle around us. And in that stillness, I realized something had shifted. I wasn't just her neighbor anymore. I was someone she was letting in. The tea grew cold before either of us noticed. Our conversation had started light, circling around safe topics, but little by little it wandered into quieter places. There was something about her presence that drew honesty out of me, the kind of honesty I rarely shared, even with people my own age. I told her about the uncertainty I carried, about how I often felt like I was drifting without an anchor, about how I wanted to prove myself but didn't always know how. The words stumbled out awkwardly at first, but she listened without interruption, her gaze steady and patient, as though my words mattered enough to wait for. When I stopped, she exhaled softly, as if she had been holding something too. She traced the rim of her cup with her fingertip before speaking. "You know," she said quietly, "I don't usually let people this close. I've built a habit of keeping a safe distance. Her voice faltered slightly, the kind of hesitation that comes only when someone is admitting more than they meant to. I stayed still, not wanting to break the fragile openness in the room. She gave a small, almost self-conscious smile. It's easier that way. People make assumptions. They see a woman my age spending time with someone younger, and suddenly they've already written the story for us. And I've lived long enough to know how unkind those stories can be. There was no bitterness in her tone, just a quiet weariness, like she was tired of fighting invisible battles. I leaned forward, resting my hands on my knees. I don't care what people say, I admitted. The words came out faster than I intended, almost too raw. I mean, I notice you, not just because you're different or older or whatever people might think, but because you make me feel. I stopped, searching for the right word. Seen. Like I'm not just another face in the hallway. Her eyes softened, and for the first time that evening, her composure slipped just enough for me to glimpse something vulnerable beneath it. She set her cup down, her hand trembling ever so slightly as she pulled it back. You make me feel seen too, she whispered. The room went quiet after that. Not the kind of silence that begged to be filled, but the kind that held weight, heavy, meaningful. Her hand rested on the table, fingers curled loosely, and I found myself staring at it, torn between restraint and the pull of closeness. I didn't reach for her. Not yet. Instead, I placed my hand near hers, close enough that the warmth from her skin reached mine. That small, invisible bridge between us seemed louder than any touch. She noticed. I could tell from the way her breath hitched, from the way her eyes flicked down to the space between us before rising to meet mine again. For a moment, everything else fell away. The apartment walls, the tea cooling on the table, the outside world with its assumptions and noise. It was just her, and me, and the unspoken truth hanging between us. The days after that evening stretched out longer than usual. Every time I walked past her door, my chest tightened. I thought about her words, about the way her hand had trembled, about the quiet admission she had let slip. You make me feel seen too. I wanted to knock again. God, I wanted to, but hesitation sat heavy in me. Questions, doubts, the voice in my head whispering that maybe I had already crossed the line. And yet, each night I caught myself pacing. Each night, I slowed when I passed her apartment, my hand twitching as though it already knew where it belonged. Until finally, one evening, I gave in. I stood outside her door for a long time, listening to the silence inside. My knuckles hovered above the wood, my pulse thudding in my ears. I told myself I'd turn away, that I'd come back tomorrow, that it was too late. But then, almost without meaning to, I knocked. One soft knock, then another. The sound echoed through the hallway, and before I could step back, the door opened. She was there. Her expression wasn't surprised. It was something else, something quieter. Relief, maybe, like she had been waiting. She leaned against the frame, her hair falling loose over her shoulders, a soft cardigan pulled close around her. The warm light behind her spilled into the hallway, and for a moment I felt like I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't name. Her eyes searched mine, steady and unflinching. And then she stepped closer. Not into the hallway, not fully, just enough that the space between us closed to almost nothing. Her hand rose, hesitant at first, before coming to rest on my arm. You knocked again, she said softly. Her palm was warm through the fabric of my sleeve. My breath caught, and I realized how long it had been since such a simple touch had undone me this completely. She looked up at me then, her voice dropping lower, barely above a whisper. I told you, if you knocked again, I wouldn't say no. The words carried none of the playful tease they had the first time. Now, they felt fragile, exposed. like a confession she wasn't sure she was ready to make, but couldn't hold back any longer. I swallowed, my throat dry. Every instinct told me to say something, to fill the silence, but I couldn't. All I could do was stand there, feeling the weight of her hand on my arm, the closeness of her body just inches from mine. The air between us felt charged, like the pause before rain breaks open from the sky. I finally managed to breathe out her name, barely audible, and she closed her eyes for just a second, as if the sound of it carried more meaning than anything else could. When she opened them again, her gaze softened. She gave the faintest smile, and with her hands still resting on me, she whispered, "Come inside." And this time I didn't hesitate. Her words lingered as I stepped inside. Come inside. It wasn't the words themselves that struck me. It was the way she said them. Not rushed, not playful, not even hesitant. They were steady, carrying both a quiet relief and a careful invitation, as though she had finally decided to let down the walls she had held for so long. The door clicked softly behind us, and the apartment felt different now than it had before. The same shelves lined with books, the same soft lamplight, the same faint scent of jasmine and vanilla, but layered now with something else. The unmistakable awareness of being led into a part of her life that wasn't meant for everyone. We sat on the couch, close but not touching at first. The cushions dipped beneath our weight, drawing us subtly toward each other. She tucked one leg beneath herself, curling slightly in my direction, and I mirrored the shift without thinking. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was warm, almost protective. Outside, the city moved on. Footsteps in the stairwell, a car horn in the distance. But inside, the world felt smaller, softer. Finally, she exhaled and leaned the slightest bit closer, her shoulder brushing mine. It was such a simple gesture, yet it sent a rush of warmth through me, loosening the knots of hesitation that had been tightening for days. "You make this feel," she began, then trailed off, shaking her head. "I don't know. Different. Easy." I turned toward her, meeting her gaze. "It feels easy for me too." Her lips curved into the faintest smile, but her eyes carried that same vulnerability I had glimpsed before. Slowly, almost cautiously, she let her head rest against my shoulder. The weight was light, but the meaning behind it was anything but. My chest tightened as I felt the soft brush of her hair against my jaw, the steady rhythm of her breathing syncing with mine. I let my arm move around her carefully, giving her room to pull away if she wanted. She didn't. Instead, she shifted closer, her hand finding rest on my forearm, her fingers curling lightly against the fabric of my sleeve. The intimacy wasn't in grand gestures. It was in the stillness, in the way our bodies fit together without effort, in the comfort of knowing neither of us was rushing to break the moment. We stayed like that, speaking in whispers now and then, but mostly letting silence hold us. At one point, I closed my eyes and listened, to her breathing, to the faint hum of the city beyond the window, to the beating of my own heart calming beneath her touch. And I realized, this was enough. More than enough. We didn't need declarations or promises. The closeness said everything. The warmth of her leaning into me, the way she allowed herself to rest there. That was her answer. When I finally looked down, she was already watching me, her eyes steady and unafraid. She gave me a small, tender smile, the kind that spoke of trust more than anything else. In that moment, I knew something had changed between us. The door between our lives had opened, and this time it wasn't going to close again. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more age gap romances told in this slow, heartfelt style, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next chapter. And if this story touched you in some way, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts.